professional writers spend an average of 7 years and $72,000 just to get the training and development to write their books. But so what's a DIYer supposed to do when you are trying to figure out how to write that first book on your own without the benefit of an MFA? It can feel so overwhelming to know when you're ready to get started on that project. So today I want to talk about how to know when you know enough and you're ready to get started on that first manuscript. Stay tuned. You've got the story, you've got the idea, you just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published, marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist. One of the things that I see so often with first-time memoir writers early in their development process is that they are so hungry for information that they can often find themselves digging down into the rabbit hole again and again and again and again and again to find answers on what makes good writing. And very often, particularly if you are someone who is fairly successful, has done well in school over the years, if you are someone who is used to being good at the things you do, oftentimes this hunger for knowledge can actually stop you from even getting started. And I want to start today's video by talking a little bit about a conversation that I had with one of our Memoir Method members recently that I think really drove this point home. Now, she and I had been working together for a while. In fact, we'd gotten all the way through her outline and that development stage that is so important, the planning stage. She'd gotten feedback on that outline, and she was at the point where she was ready to get started. Now, throughout the process of development, she had been doing great, just really nailing it, getting stuff done every single week. She was making great progress. But when we got to the point where she was ready to write chapters, something changed, and it changed pretty significantly. Instead of coming to the weekly sessions with a lot of work done, feeling really proud of herself, I really saw her start to struggle, and not only with getting the words on the page, which is of course very relatable, but also with a sense of self-doubt that I saw really increasing week after week. Now, as we were kind of talking about what was going on, one thing that she kept saying was, well, I really just need some recommendations for some really good essayists. And, I was giving her suggestions, but eventually I said, like, what is it that is making you ask for this? What are you wanting to get out of these recommended readings? And she said, well, I don't think I'm that good of a writer. And I think if I read enough essayists, maybe I'll be able to figure out what it is they are doing that makes their writing good. Now, on the surface, this seems like a great way to approach things. And in fact, in the Memoir Method and with all of my clients, I highly suggest that you are reading as you are writing. It's really helpful for so many reasons. But the red flag that popped up for me was this idea that she needed to figure out what good writing was before she could start. And the reason was she didn't want to start writing with her own voice. She wanted to start writing with a good voice. Now, in that moment, I answered her in two ways. That the way that we develop good writing is, number one, through copy editing. Any finished book you're going to read is not only just the author, and it's certainly not the author's first attempt, but it's also the product of many, many different people having their hands in that prose, making it really sing. But the second thing is that to get that good writing, that voice that we're really proud of, the prose that we really love, there is no way out but through. As you are writing that book, you develop a sense of style, you develop your voice, you hone in on what you really love to write, how you love to express yourself. And the good news is, when you're writing a book, that development is built in. It's going to take you weeks, months, sometimes years to get the whole book on the page. And during that process, you are continually improving, continually developing your voice. Now, the reason that I bring this story up is that so many of us believe that we need to know everything there is to know about writing before we can get started. Now, good news and bad news. The good news is that is incorrect. You do not need to know everything there is to know before you get started. And the bad news, the other side of that coin, is that you can't. It is not possible to know everything. It isn't even possible to know most things before you get started on that first book. In fact, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later in this video, many writers who are prolific write 5, 10, 20 books and still don't feel like they know everything. So we can use this in a couple of ways. One thing we can do is hold this in our mind. We need to know everything there is to know before we get started, and we can use that to procrastinate. Or what I want to suggest today is that we can embrace this idea that we are ready to get started, even though we don't know even close to everything there is to know about how to write a book. So today I want to talk about what the causes are of this problem, of this sense that we don't know enough to get started, of this idea that we have to wait until we know more. After we've done the causes, of course, I want to give you some solutions. And these are pretty simple solutions, especially when compared to learning everything there is to know about writing before you get started. So, what is the cause of this sense that we need to know all of this stuff and that we don't know enough to get started right now? Well, it's a little thing called imposter syndrome. We think that good writers know something that we don't, and until we know that thing, we'll never be a good writer. Of course, like imposter syndrome, this is totally a myth. Now, to get started, if you are not familiar with imposter syndrome, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is the feeling that we are an imposter and that we are about to be found out for faking an ability to do something that we really don't have the ability to do. So very clearly this is showing up if we are holding off on our writing because we don't think the prose will be good enough, right? We don't want to put things on the page because what happens if someone looks at that writing and says, oh, that is not an author. That person doesn't know what they're doing. It's one of the scariest things, and it's one of the most common fears that I hear from the people I talk to about writing their first book. The good news is imposter syndrome is almost always a lie. It is very, very uncommon that we are going to be going through this life trying our best at something that we have set out to do and that someone is going to call us out for being an imposter. It's just not really very realistic. But at the same time, it is so effective at getting in our heads and telling us that we have no business doing this thing that we so badly want to do. Now, imposter syndrome is something that I have personally thought so much about because it is something that I have personally struggled with a lot. And in fact, one of the things that I was thinking about as I was planning this video was a period of my life when I was starting this business and I felt like such an imposter. And the reason that I want to share this is I think it has a lot of application to this idea of starting out as a writer as well. And one thing that was happening was that every week in therapy, I was coming into my therapist and I was saying, I have so much imposter syndrome. I know that there are things that real business owners, because I guess I wasn't real, real business owners must know all this stuff and I don't know it. And how can I keep putting myself out there? How can I record videos? How can I go live on Instagram if I know that I'm at risk of being found out? My therapist said something to me at that point that really has been such a game changer for me. What she said was, I think you keep talking about imposter syndrome and all you are doing is reinforcing the idea that you are an imposter. So what if instead of identifying that imposter syndrome, what if instead you just fake it till you make it? What if you just trust that you are going to know what to do and you are going to figure it out? You are resilient and resourceful and everything will be okay. Stop thinking about the imposter syndrome. Stop thinking about the idea of imposters at all and just move forward and see what happens. Well, this was magical for me because once I stopped thinking of myself as an imposter, I was so much more able to identify the fact that nobody knew what they were doing. Of course, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but once I was able to really see other business owners for who they were, for what they were trying to do, it was so clear to me that there was no magic wand or magic recipe or magic way of doing things that was going to guarantee some type of success. In fact, most people were doing some form of trial and error. In fact, that's what almost all marketing is, where they were trying one strategy, evaluating whether it worked, whether they liked it, and then either continuing with the strategy, tweaking it a bit, or setting out with a new strategy. Again, this is so related to writing, right? Because writing is a craft. Writing is not something where someone can give you a template and a roadmap and you can fill it in and know it's going to be excellent work. And thank goodness, right? Because if we had a template and a roadmap, it would suck all of the joy out of this process of writing books. And I know you want that. So, the thing that I want you to think about as you are thinking about this imposter syndrome issue is that oftentimes when we are repeating to ourselves over and over that we are imposters, we are telling ourselves a lie, not only about ourselves, but about everyone else. We are telling ourselves that we are imposters. But the only way that we can be imposters, that we could be found out to not know what we're doing in this sea of people who do, is if we believe that it's true that everybody else knows what they're doing. And friends, that is just not the case. Most all of us are using this craft form, using some basic building blocks of how writing works, but then we're grabbing that freedom to experiment, to play, to get our own voice and our own unique expressive form onto the page. And that part is so much more important than any right answer or wrong answer we might come up against. Now, I promised you earlier that I wanted to give you some evidence that all writers struggle with this imposter syndrome, or this feeling that they are not good enough, that their prose is not going to be excellent enough for people to read it, that their structure is going to fall apart, that they're not going to be clear enough, that they're not going to have enough ideas to fill out a book. Everyone struggles with this. And one author that I want to highlight here is John Steinbeck. Now, most people have heard of John Steinbeck. He wrote 33 books in total, including books like Tortilla Flat, Of Mice and Men, and The Grapes of Wrath. Now, The Grapes of Wrath, which was also made into a film, it's read in almost every high school, or at least it was many years ago when I was in high school. So the thing about The Grapes of Wrath is that it is seen as one of the most important literary contributions of Depression-era literature. It is celebrated for being the amazing book that it is. Well, one of the really cool things about The Grapes of Wrath is that we have access to John Steinbeck's diary, to his journal, as he was writing that book. And that is such a gift, because it's so rare that we really get to see inside an author's mind during that process of creation. And the reason that it's so helpful that we have Steinbeck's diary from that time is that we can see from that diary that Steinbeck has imposter syndrome. He had already written Of Mice and Men, and he had imposter syndrome. And I want to read you a line out of his diary, which was published later as Working Days, the Journals of the Grapes of Wrath. And one of the quotes really stood out to me because I think it paints such a clear picture of this feeling of not being good enough and how pervasive that is, no matter how successful you are, no matter how many books you've written. So Steinbeck wrote, "My many weaknesses are beginning to show their heads. I'm not a writer. I've been fooling myself and other people. I wish I were. I'll try to go on with my work now. Just a stint every day does it." Steinbeck wrote, "I've been fooling myself and other people. I'm not a writer." Oh my gosh, can you believe that? Even in that language, I've been fooling myself and others, that is almost the very definition of imposter syndrome. It did not matter that he had written some of the most important works of his era. It didn't matter. He still felt like an imposter. Now, I don't say this because I want you to keep on feeling like an imposter so that you can write like John Steinbeck. In fact, I think he probably would have been an even more phenomenal writer if he didn't carry that self-doubt around. The reason I share that story is to be some comfort, some community, that if you are feeling that way, if you're feeling inadequate, if you're feeling that you're not ready to get started, you are in such good company, my friends. Everyone feels that way. So knowing that, how are we going to tackle this issue? Because we have got to get rid of this imposter syndrome because it's blocking so many amazing voices from getting that book done and getting it out into the world. So you will be unsurprised to hear that my solution has to do with changing your mindset. Not only are we going to stop talking about imposter syndrome, we're certainly going to stop thinking of ourselves as imposters. I want to kind of turn this idea of being an imposter on its head because I think there are some ways to think about it that just show us how absurd it is to think that we are some imposter about to be found out. So I've got 4 questions that I want you to ask yourself, and I really want you to ask yourself these questions. If you are a journaler, I want you to journal on them. Write down what you really think the answer is. If you're somebody that's more kind of interior, you want to think about it, spend some time meditating, spend some time thinking about it. Grab a friend, talk about these answers. I really want you to get down into what I'm going to say here because I think it's so important that we are building ourselves up and that we are really calling out these myths of not being good enough for what they are, which is lies. Okay, without further ado, the 4 questions that I want you to ask yourself the next time you're feeling like an imposter. Number 1, why would it be so bad to be an imposter? Now, I know this is a really cheeky of me, but truly, why is it so bad? Why do we think it's so bad to be an imposter? And one thing I want to point out here is that actually, particularly in American culture, but I would venture a guess to say all over the world, people actually love it when somebody comes in as an outsider, a dark horse, and conquers something, right? We love that. We love somebody who no one expected to succeed, and suddenly there they are on top. We love somebody that's a self-made person, right? That's the whole American culture. So why would it be so bad to be an imposter? Maybe that's exactly what this world needs. Maybe what readers need is your viewpoint as someone who is coming from outside this very niched in writing community and bringing your fresh perspective and bringing your fresh ways of approaching things. Maybe being an imposter is a really good thing. So ask yourself, why would it be so bad if you were an imposter? What would make that so bad? Why is that so scary? Okay, number 2, the second question that I want you to ask yourself is, in what areas are you definitely not an imposter? Now, all of us have things that we could try to do, and we probably are imposters, right? Maybe that's not such a bad thing, but certainly I am not going to be taking up basketball anytime soon. So there are lots of things that we might want to do that we would be imposters in. But I also guarantee that you have areas of your life where you are certainly not an imposter. And I want you to really hype these up for yourself. Now, particularly if you are setting out to write a book, whether that is a memoir or a nonfiction book or even a fiction book, you are coming into that process knowing some things really, really well. What I see very, very often with the people that we work with in the memoir method is, of course, they know their story. Of course, we're all experts in our own story, right? But that usually they're also experts in interpretation. Usually the folks that come to me that want to work with me have been thinking about that story so much that they are experts in how that story could help other people. They have a very, very clear sense that that story could change people's lives. You are an expert in that. You are an expert in what it feels like to overcome your trauma. You are an expert in that topic that you talk about every day. You are an expert in many, many areas. The writing, that's a technical thing. You can get that done, right? That's a craft. The knowledge, the expertise, that is way, way harder to grab a hold of, right? People that don't have the experience of overcoming something really hard, they can't fake that, right? You can get through the writing part. you can get the resources, you can get the support and the coaching, you can get through the writing part. That other piece, the piece where you are definitely not an imposter, that part's way harder to replicate. So let's embrace the areas that we are definitely not imposters. So for you, what are those areas? Where do you know that your voice belongs? Let's focus there. Okay, number 3, the third question I want you to ask yourself is, what does it really mean to be an imposter? Now, I think this is such an interesting question because it's easy to assume that an imposter is a bad thing. Now, we've already kind of talked about why that wouldn't be bad, but I want to go a little deeper here. What does it mean to be an imposter? Doesn't it mean that you are trying something new, that you are branching out and expanding who you are? And oh my gosh, that expansion, that learning and growing and trying new things, that's the entire thing that makes us humans. That's our soul, right? So what does it mean to be an imposter? It means that you are so brave. It means that you are so interested in learning something new that you're willing to put yourself out there. What does it mean to you to be an imposter? Because how amazing is it that you are so brave that you will go out there and try something that you feel totally inadequate at? That is an amazing, amazing thing. And when you can embrace the fact that what you are doing is incredible, you will have so much more respect for the things that you have learned about this craft, for the ways that you are developing as you set out to practice this thing that we call writing. All right, number 4, the final question that I want you to give some thought to is, where's the cutoff? What would it mean to not be an imposter? What would you have to have achieved to feel like you're not an imposter? As I talked about earlier with John Steinbeck, all of us are constantly expanding and growing and learning new things. And as we do that, new bars are set for ourselves, right? There's always a new challenge that we want to achieve. But the problem is that can keep you perpetually feeling like an imposter. If you keep raising the bar for what it means to be an imposter versus an expert, you'll never be able to hit that bar and you'll never be able to feel comfortable. So let's define it. Let's pin it down. Let's make imposter syndrome answer for itself. What's the bar? What's the cutoff? Because the least we can do for ourselves is define it before we measure ourselves against it. Okay, I hope that this has been helpful in terms of thinking about your mindset, thinking about how we can overcome this sense that we're just not ready to get started when, I promise you, you are. Get started today. Now, you might need some resources to help you along the way. One of those is our free memoir method checklist, which you can download at pageandpodium.com/checklist. That's going to take you through all of the steps of the process of writing your memoir, which really is one of the hardest parts of the process. So get out there, embrace all of those resources, get some support if you feel like you need it, but do not convince yourself for a second that you are an imposter. You're not. You are ready to start this book, and I can't wait to read it. Happy writing. You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.